Pope Francis, the first non-European head of the Roman Catholic Church in more than a millennium, died at age 88. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, a top Vatican official, announced the death of Pope Francis from the Casa Santa Marta on Monday morning. "Dearest brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father," Farrell said in a statement. "His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and of His Church. He taught us to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially in favor of the poorest and most marginalized. With immense gratitude for his example as a true disciple of the Lord Jesus, we commend the soul of Pope Francis to the infinite merciful love of the one and triune God." The next pope will be selected according to rituals written and developed over centuries. After the death of Francis was confirmed by the Vatican's health department and the Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell, a well-worn procedure will now be followed. Initially, the Pope will be dressed in a white cassock and brought to his private chapel. And Cardinal Farrell, the now de facto administrator of the Vatican, will gather there with other officials and members of the Pope's family, where Francis's body will be placed and dressed in red. Cardinal Farrell, who is from the US and has Irish heritage, will then secure all of Francis' private papers and seal his apartments. Francis has lived throughout his papacy in a large section of the second floor at the Casa Santa Marta in Vatican City. The Cardinal will also arrange for the destruction of the so-called fisherman's ring, used by the Pope to seal documents, with a ceremonial hammer, to prevent forgeries. His funeral and burial must take place between 4 and 6 days after his death. Within 15 to 20 days of his death, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, 91, will summon the cardinals to Rome for what is known as a conclave to elect Francis' successor. During the time between Francis' death and the election of his successor, the College of Cardinals will keep general oversight of the Church, but it is barred from making any major decisions. The cardinals will gather in the Sistine Chapel, where they must all swear an oath of secrecy and vote by secret ballot. Only cardinals under age 80 are eligible to vote, and a 2/3 majority is needed to elect a new pope. The cardinals will cast repeated votes until a 2/3 majority emerges. Francis was one of the most popular popes in decades and a towering figure on the world stage, addressing not just Catholics but the men and women of our time. The outspoken pope lent his voice to almost every modern issue facing the world, often taking the side of the marginalized and vulnerable. He spoke out against commercial exploitation of the environment, rich countries' unwillingness to accept migrants, the alienation caused by technology, and the lucrative sale of weapons of war. He was unafraid to tussle with some of the most powerful figures in politics, famously calling President Trump's plans to build a border wall not Christian in 2016, and correcting Vice President Vance on Christians' obligations to care for immigrants in 2025. For all of that, Francis was at times a controversial figure in his own church. Conservative critics charged him with bending church dogma as a concession to modern mores. Progressives, meanwhile, were disappointed that he did not go further to include LGBTQ Catholics and women in church leadership roles. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in 1936 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the son of Italian immigrants. He was proud of his Argentine heritage. He had a particular fondness for mate, the caffeine-rich infused drink, and tango. On his 78th birthday, Francis welcomed hundreds of couples as they danced the tango in St. Peter's Square. He clearly appreciated the gift. After all, before becoming a priest, he'd worked as a nightclub bouncer in Buenos Aires. Pope Francis was beloved for his common touch, wading into crowds, kissing babies, disabled people, and disfigured individuals. He was oblivious to his aide's security fears, refusing to ride in a bulletproof Pope mobile. He set many precedents. The first Jesuit Pope, the first to take the name of St. Francis of Assisi, and the first from the global south. Bergoglio was elected Pope on March 13, 2013, following the surprise resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, who died in December 2022. Pope Francis broke with tradition from the start, opting to live in a Vatican hotel rather than the opulent papal quarters. He made a powerful statement by rejecting the monarchical trappings of the papacy, according to journalist Nicole Winfield, who covers the Vatican for the Associated Press. She summed it up this way: "I'm going to live with regular people. I am going to get up in the morning and go to the dining hall and have my breakfast. At dinner time, I am going to line up with everyone else cafeteria style and get my dinner. I am going to microwave my dinner when it's not warm enough. Yes, he nuked his own food. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, a megalopolis with huge gaps between rich and poor, he stayed close to his flock in the shantytowns. Catholic Church historian and Villanova University theology professor Massimo Fagioli said that's why the dispossessed on the peripheries of society became the focus of Francis' papacy. Most popes before Francis had no occasions to meet with the outcasts, and that is something that got to real people even beyond the Catholic Church, said Fagioli. Pope Francis' first papal trip was to Lampedusa, the southern Italian island that has been a gateway to Europe for hundreds of thousands of migrants fleeing war and poverty in Africa and the Middle East. There, he denounced the globalization of indifference toward migrants that makes us all unnamed, responsible, yet nameless and faceless. Weeks later, in his first airborne news conference, following his visit to Brazil, Francis uttered a phrase that would define his papacy. If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge? That seemed like the beginning of a shift. In 1986, then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the Vatican's enforcer of doctrine at the time, who went on to become Pope Benedict XVI, had declared in a document that the inclination of the homosexual person is not a sin, but an objective disorder with a strong tendency toward intrinsic moral evil. Bergoglio himself had said in 2010 that Argentina's same-sex marriage legislation was an attempt to destroy God's plan. But as Pope, he was hailed by LGBTQ rights groups for calling for laws to protect same-sex couples. Still, the Vatican sent mixed signals during his tenure. In June 2021, it filed a formal diplomatic protest with the Italian government over a draft law that would criminalize violence and hate speech against LGBTQ people and disabled people, as well as misogyny. The Vatican feared the legislation could make the Church vulnerable to prosecution for not conducting same-sex marriages, for opposing adoption by same-sex couples, and for refusing to teach gender theory in Catholic schools. And while Francis repeatedly condemned discrimination and violence against gay people, he decried as ideological colonization, the theory that gender is largely a social construct rather than determined solely by a person's biological sex. A few months into his first year as Pope, in November 2013, Pope Francis made his debut as a papal writer with the Joy of the Gospel. It was quickly dubbed his I Have a Dream document. A ND after two papacies focused on the primacy of church doctrine. In 2015, Francis convened a year-long jubilee on the primacy of mercy. No one can be excluded from the mercy of God. The church is the house where everyone is welcomed and no one is rejected, Francis said in a statement. In the 2016 document called The Joy of Love, Francis called for a more compassionate church toward imperfect Catholics, saying no one can be condemned forever. Winfield, the AP reporter, said the document took away the black and white nature of doctrine on sex and made it more of a personal decision. It means a person working out these issues almost directly with God, Winfield explains, to come to a decision about what was best for his or her family. In a long interview with priest Antonio Spadaro, who was editor-in-chief of the Jesuit journal La Civiltà Cattolica, Francis outlined his vision of the Catholic Church as a field hospital after battle, healing the wounds of the faithful and going out to find those who have been hurt, excluded, or fallen away. Spadaro told NPR that this wasn't just a nice image. The Church is not sometimes a field hospital. The Church is a field hospital to save the people, not just to cure some little problems, the complete openness of the Church toward the world. After the Vatican resisted requests from historians and Jewish groups for decades, Pope Francis announced he would allow scholars access to the archives of Pope Pius XII, the controversial World War II pontiff who remained publicly silent while some 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Bergoglio's election had sparked great hope among Catholic women, lay and nuns, that he would promote a greater role for women in the Church. The result was more or less 2 steps forward, 1 backward. In the early years of his papacy, Francis made some cringeworthy comments. When he appointed several women to a blue-ribbon theological commission, he called female theologians strawberries on the cake. Addressing the European Parliament, lamenting Europe's low birth rate, he compared Europe to a grandmother who is no longer fertile and vibrant. But Pope Francis was not afraid to criticize Western societies. In the sweeping encyclical Laudato Si', Praise be to you, on the environment, he blamed humans for having turned the earth into what he called an immense pile of filth. In one of his most blistering speeches against laissez-faire capitalism, While visiting Bolivia, he said that behind the harm being done to the environment is what he called the dung of the devil, the unfettered pursuit of money. Once capital becomes an idol and guides people's decisions, once greed for money presides over the entire socio-economic system, Francis said, it ruins society, it sets people against one another, it even puts at risk our common home, our sister, Mother Earth. Francis' outspokenness on issues like the environment and capitalism, as well as his predilection for mercy over strict doctrinal observance and for inclusion over punishment, met with vehement opposition from conservatives within and outside the Catholic Church. Traditionalist Catholics were incensed in particular by Francis' easing of the ban on communion for divorced people and by the possibility that married men of proven virtue could be ordained as priests to offset a clergy shortage. Pope Francis was among the first world leaders to speak out about the coronavirus as he tried to ease people's anxieties about the mysterious new infection. In March 2020, with Italy ground zero of the coronavirus pandemic in Europe and with a spiraling death toll, Francis presided over an extraordinary ritual. Against the dramatic backdrop of an empty St. Peter's Square, glistening in the rain, the Pope prayed for an end to the pandemic. "We find ourselves afraid and lost," Francis said. "We were caught off guard by an unexpected, turbulent storm. We have realized that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented. All of us called to row together, each of us in need of comforting the other." Before becoming Pope, Bergoglio had traveled very little. As Pope Francis, he became a global player, preferring to visit what he called the periphery of the world in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. His travels included visits to Myanmar, Bangladesh, Japan, the Central African Republic, Mozambique, Uganda, Madagascar, Israel, Egypt, Iraq, Ecuador, Chile, and Cuba, among other countries. He helped restore relations between the US and Cuba during the Obama administration. And his watchwords were encounter, dialogue, reconciliation, and build bridges, not walls. Interfaith dialogue was one of the pillars of his papacy. He forged closer ties with the Orthodox Church, Protestants, and Muslims, and he continued the Vatican's good relations with Jews set forth by St. John Paul II. Francis, who is known for bringing a more relaxed style to the Church, changed the funeral rites of popes last year, and so his will be different to those who have gone before him. Since the 13th century, popes' embalmed bodies have gone on public view on a raised pedestal, but Francis altered that. A public viewing will instead take place in St. Peter's Basilica, where thousands have paid respects to popes in the past. Francis' body will remain in a coffin, which will not be on a raised pedestal. After every vote, smoke will be released through a chimney that can be seen from St. Peter's Square, where huge crowds have previously formed to watch. If a vote ends without a 2/3 majority, the smoke is black. When a decision is reached, the smoke will be white. There is speculation about who could be next in line, including Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana, former head of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. Cardinal Luis Tagle, prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples and former Archbishop of Manila, is also said to be in the running, and as a Filipino, would be the first Asian pope. Other possible candidates include Cardinals Matteo Zuppi, Gerhard Muller, Angelo Scola, Angelo Bagnasco. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Pope Francis, we remember a man who touched millions with his humility, compassion, and unwavering commitment to peace and justice. His messages will continue to inspire generations to come. Thank you for watching and honoring his memory with us. If you found this video meaningful, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. And if you'd like to share your thoughts or memories, feel free to leave a comment below.